Hey everybody, AstartesGaming here, back with another look at the design journals for Chronicles of Elyria. I am recording this pretty late. I just got home from work. You can see I haven't even taken my work shirt off yet. But I want to dive into this and talk about technology and research, because I think this is a really interesting thing that they've done with the game here, or at least they plan to do with the game. And I don't know that anybody's really attempted this before, and I'm really looking forward to seeing how well they can implement this, because I think it would be just like mind blowing if they were able to actually uh, come through with it as they're hoping to. So, when I first set out to design Chronicles of Elyria, I defined the 5 core principles which I wanted to drive all major decisions. The first was that the world must be dynamic and immersive. If something in the world can change, either through the player interaction or naturally over time, it probably should. This led to several thought experiments in which I examined the ways in which our world is dynamic. While most MMOs are static, my experiments began with the characters themselves and the introduction of aging and dying. From there, it expanded to a character's environment with things like day and night cycles, weather, seasons, and even natural disasters. Scroll down so you guys can see this. Next, it grew to include the non-natural world with things like dynamic civilizations, political boundaries, and the rise and fall of governments. Finally, it ended with the examination of the abstract concepts that make up civilization, such as culture and technology. In this week's design journal, we're going to take a look at how Chronicles of Elyria continues to push the envelope with a system of research-driven technology, which lets players determine the direction of research while allowing us to monitor the rate at which technology is evolving. This ensures we have the technology ready when the players are ready for it. And so here we have a screenshot. It looks like an old clock. And let's see. Figure 1, in-game render of a clock. Okay. Nothing mind-blowing there. In most MMORPGs, technology is static, so it's important to understand what we mean when we say technology in Chronicles of Elyria is dynamic. To do that, we first need to define what technology is. In Chronicles of Elyria, technology is represented by the set of all products and components people know how to create, as well as the set of all materials they know how to gather and process. As indicated in Design Journal number 9, Crafting and Professions, the knowledge of how to craft items or process resources is represented by recipes or patterns. As your character learns new things, the number of recipes they know will expand. When we talk about the advancement of technology, we mean the introduction of new, never before seen patterns or recipes. Let's scroll down so you guys can see this again. These new recipes can introduce the processing of new materials for gatherers, the construction of new components for producers, and even the ability to create all new, never before seen items. As can be seen from the screenshots and renders in this design journal, these can range from things like clocks and telescopes to war machines like ballistae, all the way to modes of transportation like gliders. Ooh, gliders. That sounds cool. What's not shown in this design journal is that technological advances can happen across all of the producer and gatherer skill trees, allowing for the development of new medicines and poisons, new methods of scribing, and even new construction materials. Now that we know what technology is, let's learn about how it evolves in Chronicles of Elyria. So nothing to really comment on there. Obviously, when they're talking technology, they're talking about across the entire game, and so it's not just gonna be for crafters. So the blacksmith isn't the only one who's gonna improve his smithing by working with new ores and stuff. Even scribes can come up with new ways to do things, or architects, or maybe even like politicians coming up with new ways to govern or new ways to write laws, stuff like that. So it's really going to expand across the entire game, and everybody will be involved in this regardless of what profession you are. So passive versus active research. When designing the research system, we had to make a choice about whether we wanted to make research active or passive. An active research system would be one in which players proactively spend time tinkering with things, experimenting, and, well, researching. We really liked the idea of that system. However, we felt like, and this is a first for us, that it would overcomplicate the game. What we were really looking for was the pride and achievement that comes from discovery, the collaboration that can exist when multiple people set a goal and try to achieve it together, and the excitement that comes from seeing the world evolve and change. As a result, we opted for a passive research system in which research happens automatically in the background without players having to spend time doing the research. Our first instinct was to just let players do research while offline using their OPCs, but this created problems because we wanted some research done by OPCs. While we wanted some research done by OPCs, we wanted the most challenging research to be done by players. Let's scroll down so you guys can see this. In the end, we settled on a system that lets us be a partner in determining how quickly new technology is introduced into the world while giving players full control of which technology is added. And here we have a picture of a telescope. I don't think I really need to zoom in any closer to that. You guys can see it fairly well, but we will have telescopes. Telescopes confirmed. So research. What do we got here? Research in Chronicles of Elyria is a process of trial and error that is integrated into the everyday act of crafting. Once you attain expert rank in crafting a specific item, you can choose to spend additional resources each time you craft the item to study some aspects of it in order to solve a problem. These can be things like making a blade stronger, armor lighter or more flexible, or livestock live longer. It can also be problems such as adding reflection to the surface of glass to make like a mirror, for example. So the way that you are researching is by trying to solve a problem. So for example, it would be like, this sword is, really, really powerful, but it's just too damn heavy. I don't want to carry it around everywhere with me. So your research would be, how can I make this really powerful sword light enough to be more practical? And so you would continue to make, copies of these swords and things like that, trying to figure out how you can make it so that it's still as strong, but now it's more light and efficient. And eventually you would get to the point where you're like, yeah, I've made this sword light enough where I think I can bring it around with me everywhere. And you've completed your research. That's just one example. Obviously, it could be a variety of things, but that's just one example that I thought of off the top of my head. Hopefully that helps clarify things for you guys. So your percent chance of solving a specific problem is based on the amount of research you and others have contributed to solving the problem. Some problems require more research than others, and you won't know how much research is required or how far along you are. In this way, research may feel a bit random, but it's not. The more research you pour into something, the more likely you are to discover something. So we see here that yes, you can collaborate to research. You don't need to do it on your own. We also see that you're not going to know how far along you are. There's no progress bar. Well, there is, but not a visible one. So you'll be working along, and then someday you'll complete your objective, and it'll be like a eureka moment, but you won't know that you're approaching that until it happens. So that will add some excitement to it, because you're never going to know when you're approaching that moment until it happens. So I think that'll add, quite a bit of excitement and stuff to research. It might be a little bit frustrating, especially for the particularly long ones that you don't know how far along you are. But I think in most cases, after you've done a couple, you'll probably get an idea of how long an average research project is going to take. And so depending on how difficult you think the problem that you're trying to solve is, you can probably venture to guess, a rough estimate of how long it'll take. Alright, so research versus production. When first crafting a new item, you're invariably focused first and foremost on making sure you're able to create the item at a passable quality. However, after you've attained the level of expert for that specific item you're sufficiently capable of making, I feel like there should have been a comma in there. A comma. However, after you've attained the level of expert for that specific item, you're sufficiently capable of making the item that you can instead optimize for either advanced knowledge or faster production. That was a long sentence. Okay, so once you are an expert at making a sword, you can then choose, do I want to advance my knowledge about swords when I make swords, or do I want to just crank out a bunch of them to sell? So depending on what your focus is. If you're just, trying to whip up some to restock your inventory, you can just focus on that. Just focus on, pumping out a bunch of swords to put on the shelves in your shop. But if you've got plenty of swords on the shelf and you're thinking, well, what am I going to do with these resources? You can maybe look into how to improve your sword quality so that once you sell through this current batch, you can make some even better swords to put out later. Beginning at expert level, a slider will appear on your crafting UI, which begins in the middle with quality and then extends to the left and right towards two different values. To the left is research and to the right is production. Where you put the value of that slider affects many different aspects of the particular crafting or material processing you're about to do. It affects whether or not you have the potential to discover something, how much fatigue you have after crafting an item, so fatigue will play a part, the cost of performing the crafting or processing in terms of resources, and how severe the risk of failure. Let me scroll down so you guys can see this, because I don't want to read through it and you can't follow along with me. Move the slider more to the left and you'll have a higher chance to discover something. Move the slider to the right and you'll suffer less fatigue from the crafting process and will be able to push out more items more quickly. Regardless of which direction you adjust the slider, doing so will cost you more resources and also increase the risk that your experiment or work beyond your capabilities. Oh, no, I guess that does make sense. Risk that you'll experiment or work beyond your capabilities and end up destroying your resources, or worse, injuring yourself. After all, one of the biggest blockers of innovation and automation is personal risk. Okay, one thing they don't mention in here that I wanted to clarify is there's actually 3 variables that you're controlling with this slider. So they sort of briefly touched on it in the previous paragraph. If you leave this slider in the middle, that is going to be maximum quality for that item. So like right down the middle is going to be just, no extra resources, no anything, just I want to make the best sword I can, middle. If you go a little bit to the left, you're going to learn a little bit more about making the sword, or a little bit to the right, you're going to spend a little bit less effort doing so. But right down the middle is going to be the best quality item that you can make. Now, obviously, that's not always important. So if you want to swing it off to the left and learn something, or swing it off to the right and crank out a bunch, then, go for it. But if you're trying to make a really impressive sword for somebody, you're probably going to want to stick, right down the middle. So risk versus reward for producers and gatherers. While champions and explorers are often seen as the heroic characters in the world, producers and gatherers are no less important. While producers never have to leave the safety of the village, there's still ways for them to take risk, and as a result, I had like a little mini burp there, change the outcome of the overall story. The further you move the slider to the left or right on the research versus production bar, the more risk you take. I feel like you could still take risk. I mean, even if I'm going to be playing a blacksmith character, I'm probably going to be transporting some of my goods to sell them somewhere, or maybe going to a mine to make a deal with the miners, to purchase ore and stuff. It's not like you're never going to leave the village, I feel like. At least not in my case. I mean, somebody who's a little bit worried might, find other ways to accomplish those things. But personally, I would probably be leaving the village quite a bit. Initially, you may just be risking the loss of materials and perhaps the destruction of your tools, but by moving the slider out further, you risk the loss of your building, personal injury, and maybe even death. So you could, burn down your house that you're working in, or, blow your fingers off, or, you could maim yourself all kinds of ways depending on what you're doing. Although I would be very amused to hear of like a scribe who injured himself doing like research, like put a pen through his, or I guess it would be a quill, like put a quill through his hand or something ridiculous. But yeah. So, but as with adventuring, with great risk comes great reward. If you regularly go out on a limb to push the boundary of innovation, you can expect to achieve greatness within the technological community. Okay, so it's just really a matter of balancing risk versus reward, as they kind of mention up there. So, depending on what you're doing, it might be worth taking the risk. Sometimes it might not be. It's completely up to you. You don't have to take a risk at all if you don't want to. But it is a really cool system, at least so far, that allows you to kind of gamble on certain things or not, and potentially reap the rewards if you do. So here we have a ballista. Pretty cool. So necessity is the mother of invention. When trying to decide how a game mechanic should work, I often look to our reality for hints and guidance. In the case of technology and research, innovation in our world has often occurred as a result of effort to solve a specific problem. At the same time, new ideas and technology often happen due to experimentation, trial, and effort. In Chronicles of Elyria, we mimic this behavior by allowing players to determine which types of problems they want to solve. Anytime you move the research versus production slider to the left of center, a button becomes active which, when clicked, gives you a list of problems you'd like to solve or things you'd like to investigate with respect to the item you're creating. This is one of the most exciting parts of this system, as the list is dynamic and changes based on several different triggers. So we have event-driven triggers. Let's scroll down so you guys can see these. Event-driven triggers, you may have the option to research new technology based on a changing world state, such as the advancement of the story or going to war with another kingdom. So what would be a good example of that? Maybe you are, you're a member or like a blacksmith, an armor maker or whatever for a certain kingdom, and you're going to war with a kingdom that's known for having particularly almost messed that one up, deadly archers who use a specific type of arrow that penetrates armor. And so maybe because of this war, you trigger an event to develop armor that's even more arrow resistant than the current armor that your kingdom is using. So that is an example of that one. Skill and mastery driven triggers. If you get specific skills to a certain mastery, the synergy between the different skills may provide you with additional research opportunities. For example, achieving mastery in certain carpentry and tailoring skills may provide you the opportunity to research interesting new technologies. Another example would be if you're a blacksmith and you've also been working on your woodworking skills, you may be able to research how to more effectively use wood in your weapon designs, maybe how to make like stronger wooden shields, or how to better lay or combine metal and wood to make those shields, or maybe how to make very ornate wooden handles for your metal swords, something like that. Resource driven triggers. Having multiple resources in your inventory can be combined together in new and unique ways, can often provide you the ability to do research. For example, if you've got copper and tin ore in your inventory and attempt to make a copper bar, you may be able to research bronze. So the obvious example with this is making different types of alloys, such as like steel. What else? I'm sure a lot of medicines and poisons will be developed on triggers such as these. So sort of like in Skyrim, and here I am going back to Skyrim again. When you're in the alchemy menu and you're just kind of like throwing different ingredients together to see what happens, sort of like that. But it can be done for smelting different ingots together or different ores together to make different ingots and things like that. So it's going to apply broadly, not just to like alchemy, for example. And then we have location-driven triggers. Some technologies require characters to be in specific locations in order to unlock specific technologies. This makes sense intuitively. After all, it doesn't really make sense for someone who's landlocked to be researching boat making. Okay, well, they gave an example there. And another example would be like, maybe someone in like a very dry desert region researching, for example, better irrigation or something, so that they are able to grow crops in very arid conditions. That's just a thought. So based on this system, there is some amount of metagame thinking aloud. We want players who understand the relationship between certain materials, the components they make, and the final product to play a role. If I, as a player, know how to construct a telescope, I should be able to use that information when guiding what I research to eventually lead to the discovery of a telescope. So real world knowledge is going to come into play here because the game is going to be based on real world knowledge. And so if you know how to make certain things, you might have an advantage over someone who doesn't actually have any practical knowledge in this field. So again, player skill coming into play here. Before we were kind of talking about it in combat and things like that, but now we're talking about it in research. So somebody who in real life is kind of skilled in a particular field may have an advantage on someone who's not. So, I mean, player skill is always nice. It is cool to sort of balance the playing field for people who, I mean, may enjoy something but aren't necessarily good at it. But I do like that they are taking steps here to separate people who are very skilled in a particular thing versus people who aren't. So, I mean, it is nice to kind of, you know, make it fun for everybody, but at the same time, you can't really feel immersed and special in a world where everybody is special. So, I understand what they're trying to do. So, let's see, another important thing to note about this system is we may provide a large number of prompts across a wide number of skills without actually having the assets or mechanics in place to support the research players are doing. But by monitoring and observing what players are researching, it communicates to us what the players' interests are and can push us to implement additional technologies. And so here we have a shot of a glider, more like a wingsuit than a glider. Pretty cool though. I don't know how practical that would be, but it looks pretty awesome. The leather outfit he's got on is pretty cool too. It's very ornate, like especially in this like little abdomen area here. Okay, so guilds and educational institutions. While it's possible to do research or increase production on your own, it's much easier to do if you're part of a guild or educational institute. Guilds and schools often have advanced versions of the crafting stations, which allow added benefits. Schools often have crafting stations which allow for safer research, while guilds may have versions that allow for safer mass production. As well, if you do research as part of a guild or school, your ability to discover something is based not only on the time you spent in research, but also the time everyone else in your guild or school has spent in research. I feel like I basically said the same thing there twice. But yeah, so your particular research is going to combine everybody else in your particular group. So whether that's a guild or, you know, an educational institution, you'll be researching alongside everybody else in that group who's researching. So it'll speed things up quite a bit. This can result in dramatically increased chance of discovery. Let's scroll down so you guys can see. There is a trade-off, however. If you perform research on the equipment of an organization, such as a guild or school, you're implicitly agreeing to share all discoveries you make with the institution. The effect is quite different depending on the institution. If you make a discovery as part of a school, they will turn around and make the information freely available to everyone. On the other hand, a guild will often go and patent the technology, granting them sole and exclusive rights to utilize the new knowledge. So, if you do not research this stuff on your own, you do lose out on the benefits of being the first one to discover it. However, because you're researching this as a group, you have a much better chance and will be completing this much more efficiently, so you'll be able to do more research. It really depends on what you want to do, and I do see a ton of potential here for, like, I think we talked about it before, like, not necessarily like corporate espionage, but whatever it would be considered in like medieval times. But you could definitely, you know, steal research or steal maybe not the research itself, but the work they have done up to a certain point that could, you know, push you over the hill in completing the research. And so I would find that really interesting too, to have like some shady guilds or some shady educational institutions that are kind of spying on each other. That would be kind of interesting. And here we have the wingsuit again from the reverse side. It looks a little bit more blue in this picture. I like the like bird head carved into it. It's pretty cool looking. Again, I don't know how practical that would be, but it's a video game, so whatever. So, patents and implicit contracts. And this is perfect because we're just about out of time, so we'll wrap it up with this. Patents are a kingdom-wide system. Kingdom-wide, not global. That's an important point. That allows non-royalty or nobility to create laws through implicit contracts. These implicit contracts prevent others from creating an item or processing a resource without breaking a patent law. Can others still do it if they know how? Sure. While patents protect the investment someone has made in researching a technology, it's still up to the individual to enforce the implicit contract. So you do need to enforce it. It's not just going to be enforced for you. Which means that if you are a loner and you patent your technology, you probably won't be able to enforce that as well as a guild who patents it. So, obviously, the benefits of a patent are sort of diminished if you're taking them out on your own. Patents give the owner exclusive rights to use the technology for a period of 3 real-world weeks. After the first 3-week period of time, the owner can request an extension for another 3 weeks. However, this is often very expensive. After the full 6-week period of time, or if the owner chooses not to file for an extension, the patent falls off and it becomes acceptable for anyone to create the technology. So a couple of important points there. One, it's only kingdom-wide, so another kingdom can steal this technology and use it freely. Non-royalty or nobility, so... Or actually, no, that's not really relevant. It's just saying that the average person is basically creating a law through these implicit contracts. And let's see what else. Obviously, with the way this game works and the freedom it allows, can people still steal your technology and use it? Of course they can. You need to enforce the law. And that brings us to the final point, which is taking out a patent on your own is going to be very, very difficult to maintain because chances are you don't have the resources to A, enforce that patent if somebody is breaking it, and B, after the first 3 weeks, you probably don't have the resources to extend it further. Now, a guild might be able to much better, enforce that because you have now a group of people working to do it rather than just a single person, and you may have the resources within a guild to expand that to 6 weeks. And, depending on how much profit you're making from this technology, you may be able to easily cover the cost of another 3-week patent, which could bring you even further, wealth. So it's really going to depend on, who you are, how you go about this. But they've really made an interesting mechanic here that has all kinds of nuances to it that can be taken advantage of and stuff like that. I really, really like it. I think it's super interesting. As someone who wants to play a blacksmith, I am glad that I will get to at least dabble in some of this. I don't know how much actual research I'll be doing, but I do want to try to do at least a little bit. And like I said before, I want to play in a pretty isolated village, and so I don't know that I'll be part of a guild because if that's how I go, I imagine I'd be the only blacksmith in the area, depending. But still, I really like this system, and I think anybody who likes doing research in games is just going to absolutely eat this up. So that's really all we've got to talk about today. Next time around, I'm not sure what we've got going on next time. Let's go look. What do we have for 14? Developer journals. 14, player housing, architecture, and construction. So that's going to be an important one for a lot of people, I think. Player housing is a big deal because that's where you're going to be storing all your stuff, and it's also a reflection of who you are. And it's probably going to be created or at least designed by you. So, it's definitely going to be very important if you're going to be spending a lot of time in this game. So, as always, thank you guys so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Please feel free to share my videos however you guys see fit. If you want to get involved in the Chronicles of Elyria community, you can follow the link below. And it would be very kind of you to use my referral code. And as always, once again, thank you for watching. And I will see you guys back here for Design Journal number 14.